The neon sign outside Mercer's roadside diner has been half broken for 3 years. The O flickers. The P doesn't light at all. What's left reads EN, like a question nobody bothered finishing. It's 11:50 on a Tuesday night in late October. Temperature dropped below freezing 2 hours ago, and every decent person in Harlow County is already home. Already warm, already fed. Nobody is watching the little girl inside. She moves table to table with a damp rag, silent as a ghost, wiping rings left by coffee cups and strangers who never once looked her way. She's 9 years old. Her shoes have holes. And when she thinks nobody's watching, she folds leftover dinner rolls into her apron with the careful hands of someone who has been hungry before. Someone who expects to be hungry again. In the corner booth, one man is watching. His name is Ryder Kane. He has a scar that runs from his left eyebrow to his jaw, a leather vest that's seen more miles than most men see in a lifetime, and the kind of eyes that have looked at too much darkness to be surprised by any of it anymore. He doesn't look away from the little girl. Not once. If this story already has you hooked, and I promise you it's only getting started, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now stay with me, because what happens next is going to break something open in your chest. The diner sat at the crossroads of Route 9 and an unnamed county road that appeared on no map anyone had updated since 1987. It had a counter with 7 stools, 4 booths along the window, and a kitchen that smelled permanently of bacon grease and burned coffee. The sign above the door, hand-painted in faded red letters, read, Mercer's. The apostrophe was crooked. The whole building leaned slightly to the left, like a man who'd been standing too long and couldn't quite hold himself straight anymore. Harlow was a small town. The kind of small where everyone knew whose truck was parked outside, whose house and why, where gossip traveled faster than emergency services, and where a child falling through the cracks wasn't shocking so much as unremarkable. Things fell through cracks in Harlow all the time. The economy had. The school system had. The 2 factories that used to employ half the county had. People got practiced at not seeing the damage. Ryder Kane had ridden into Harlow on a Thursday in early October, intending to stay one night. He'd been doing that for 3 weeks now, staying one more night, then another. He told himself it was the coffee. Mercer's brewed it dark and bitter, nothing like the watery stuff they pushed at chain diners along the interstate. And after 22 years on the road, a man developed certain standards. He told himself it was the quiet. The back booth in a corner diner at closing time was one of the last places in America where a man could sit for 3 hours without anyone trying to sell him something, or cure him of something, or save him from something. He didn't examine the real reason too closely. The real reason was 9 years old, wore the same gray hoodie 4 nights running, and moved through the diner after closing time with a silence so practiced it made his back teeth ache. He'd noticed her the first night by accident. He'd been watching the parking lot, old habit, cataloging vehicles and registering exits the way combat veterans did in restaurants and waiting rooms and unfamiliar rooms for the rest of their lives. It was a kind of tax the body kept collecting long after the debt should have been forgiven. A minivan. A pickup with a cracked taillight. His own bike at the end, tarp covered against the forecasted rain. The usual road noise from Route 9. Then motion in his peripheral vision, and he turned. And there was the girl. Small, dark-haired, moving between tables with a cloth that was too big for her hand, dragging it across surfaces with a methodical patience that didn't belong on a child's face. She wasn't humming, wasn't fidgeting, wasn't doing the thing kids did, dragging a task out to delay bedtime or manufacture an excuse to stay up. She was just working, steady and quiet and alone in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of other people in the room. He watched her wipe down every table. He watched her stack the salt and pepper shakers, refill the napkin dispensers, sweep beneath the counter stools with a broom handle that was 6 inches taller than she was. He watched her carry a bus tub to the kitchen, moving carefully because it was heavy, and disappear through the swinging door. What he noticed, what lodged itself between his ribs like a splinter he couldn't reach, was the moment she passed the last booth on the near side. There were 3 dinner rolls left in the breadbasket. She paused. One glance toward the kitchen. Then her hands moved quick and practiced, folding the rolls into the front pocket of her apron, and she kept walking like nothing had happened. Quick, careful, Automatic. The way you moved when you'd done something 100 times, and the only thing that changed was whether you got caught. He sat with that for a long moment. His coffee had gone cold. Route 9 hummed outside. The fluorescent light above the counter buzzed with a frequency that had probably been driving whoever worked under it slow out of their mind for years. He left a 20 under his cup and walked out into the cold without speaking to anyone. But he came back the next night. The woman who ran the front of house was named Darlene. She was in her mid-50s, moved fast despite bad knees, and had the particular kind of warm efficiency that came from 30 years of feeding people who didn't have anywhere better to be. She called everyone honey and meant it about 60% of the time. She brought Ryder his coffee without asking, topped it off without interrupting whatever he was staring at, and had the professional discretion to register that the scarred man in the corner booth with the iron-bound chapter patch on his vest was a regular now, and to treat him accordingly. The owner, Walter Boone, ran the kitchen. Ryder had caught glimpses, a large man, heavy in the shoulders, moving between the flat-top grill and the prep counter with the economical precision of someone who'd been feeding people long enough that cooking had stopped being performance and become something quieter. Walter didn't come out front much. He sent plates through the service window and trusted his staff to handle the rest. The girl, Ryder learned, was named Leah. He learned this by listening. Darlene said it once when she poked her head through the kitchen door. "Leah, hon, you get those condiments restocked?" The girl appeared from somewhere in the back, nodded once, and disappeared again. No words. Just the nod. He didn't learn anything else about her for several nights. What he did was watch, the same way he'd once watched forward positions for hours, reading patterns in the stillness, building a picture from accumulation. What he accumulated about Leah Mercer was this. She arrived at the diner every day after school, did homework at the counter for an hour if the place wasn't busy, ate whatever was going to be thrown away at the end of service, and worked until closing. She called Darlene by name but rarely initiated conversation. She never used the phone behind the counter the way a kid staying late somewhere unfamiliar would. She never asked Walter or Darlene to wait while she called someone. She never talked about home. When she left at the end of the night, nobody walked her out. He told himself that the second night. He told himself it was nothing, small-town normality, different rules out here about children and independence and things that looked concerning to a man who'd spent the last decade mostly alone, moving between cities where no one knew anyone's name. By the third night, he'd stopped telling himself anything and simply paid attention. She left the diner at 11:15, sometimes 11:30, if something needed extra cleaning. She turned right out of the parking lot, away from the main road, and walked along the county road shoulder in the dark, with her hands pushed into the front pocket of her hoodie. No flashlight, no phone. Just walking like the dark was ordinary, which maybe for her it was. He followed from a distance the fourth night, not close. Far enough that his boots on gravel didn't carry to her. He kept to the tree line where the road curved, moving slow, watching her shape in the distance against the dim ambient light from a farmhouse set back from the road. She walked a quarter mile. Then she turned off the county road onto a rutted track that led behind an old property, a house with all its windows dark, and a real estate notice nailed to the front fence that was weathered almost to illegibility. She went around the side of the property and disappeared behind it. He waited. She didn't come back out. He stood at the edge of the property for a long time in the October dark, listening to the wind move through the tree line and the distant low moan of a truck on Route 9. His breath clouded in front of him. He wasn't thinking in words anymore. He was just standing with something heavy settling into the center of his chest, a familiar weight that had no clean name but that he'd felt before, in other places, over other things that should not have been allowed to exist. He walked back to his bike and sat on it in the diner parking lot for 20 minutes before starting the engine. The storage shed was behind the main house, separated from it by what had once been a vegetable garden and was now just a rectangle of dead weeds. It was a wooden structure, maybe 12 by 14 feet, with a corrugated metal roof that had rusted along the seams. The door was secured from the inside with something. He could see the shadow of a brace against the bottom gap when he approached the following afternoon while the diner was closed and the property was empty and quiet. He stood outside it and looked at the door and didn't knock. He went to the hardware store on Main Street and bought two things, a contractor-grade emergency thermal blanket in a red plastic package, and a box of protein bars. He drove back out to the property and left them on a flat stone near the shed door, tucked against the wall so they wouldn't blow away. He drove back to town. He did not wait to see if she found them. The next morning, the stone was empty. He bought a heavier blanket the following day, then dry socks, a knit hat, a small battery lantern. He left them the same way. No note, no explanation, just left them where she'd find them and went away. It occurred to him somewhere around the fourth or fifth drop that he was doing the only thing he knew how to do for a person who wasn't ready to accept help directly, creating the conditions where she could take what she needed without having to trust anyone to give it. He'd been on the other side of that equation once. He understood the architecture of it. He didn't know if she knew it was him. He thought she probably did. She confronted him about it on a Wednesday. He'd been in his corner booth for an hour, coffee, and the crossword he never actually filled in. When she stopped beside his table during a slow stretch in service and looked at him with the particular directness children sometimes had when they decided they were done calculating risk and just wanted the answer. "That was you," she said. "What was?" She looked at him for a moment. Her expression was not grateful. It was measuring, the way you looked at something you were trying to figure out whether to trust or be afraid of. "The stuff. By the shed." He put his pen down. "Yeah. Why? Not why did you do that, or why are you being nice, or any of the fuller questions a child with more security might have asked. Just the one flat word, hard and practical, the question of someone trying to identify the angle, because in her experience, Ryder suspected, kindness always had an angle. It always tilted towards something the giver wanted. "Because it was cold," he said, "and you needed it." She stared at him. "That's it? That's it?" She stared a moment longer, like she was waiting for the rest of the sentence. The part where the terms materialized, the part that was always there, in her experience, under the good thing, the price tag folded into the lining. When it didn't come, something shifted in her face that wasn't relief exactly, but might have been its rough, cautious precursor. She went back to work without another word. He watched her go and picked up his pen and stared at the crossword he still wasn't going to fill in. In the weeks that followed, their conversations were exactly like that, short, edged, full of things neither of them said directly. She never sat down at his table. She wasn't ready for that, and he didn't push it. But she'd stop when she was passing sometimes and say something flat and direct that landed between them without decoration, and he'd answer the same way, and they'd hold the silence for a moment, and then she'd move on. "You write every day?" "Most days. Even when it rains, especially when it rains." She considered this like it was information she was filing away somewhere for later use. "Where do you go?" "Wherever the road goes." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She seemed to appreciate the honesty of the non-answer more than she would have appreciated a complete one. He got the impression that Leah Mercer had been given many complete answers in her life and had learned to distrust all of them. What he didn't tell her about yet was the other things he'd started finding out. Her name wasn't Mercer because the diner was named Mercer's. The diner had been named for a previous owner. Leah's last name was Mercer by coincidence, or by some long-ago family connection to this stretch of Route 9 that nobody seemed to remember clearly. She was 9, almost 10. She'd been enrolled in the Harlow Elementary School for 2 months. Before that, according to the school secretary who had more to say on the subject than was probably professional, Leah had been at 3 different schools in 18 months across 2 counties. Her enrollment paperwork listed a father as the responsible adult. The father's name was Dale Mercer. He dropped her off on the first day of school and had not been reliably seen since. The secretary had reported the situation to the county child services office. Someone from the office had driven out, knocked on the door of a rental property on the east side of Harlow, gotten no answer, left a card, and closed the case as unconfirmed concerns. That was 6 weeks ago. Ryder sat in his truck in the hardware store parking lot on a gray November afternoon and looked at the ceiling and felt something move through him that wasn't anger exactly, or wasn't only anger. It was the specific exhaustion of a man who had seen too many times how the machinery that was supposed to protect people actually functioned when tested. how many boxes it could check while leaving a child to sleep under a corrugated metal roof in November. He thought about his options for a long time. He didn't have many that were clean. The first real conversation, the one that lasted longer than 90 seconds and moved past surface transactions, happened on a Friday night during a rainstorm that knocked out the power on Route 9 for 40 minutes. Darlene had lit candles and Walter had kept the gas range running, and the diner had a peculiar temporary beauty in the candlelight, the way places sometimes looked more honest in the dark, stripped of their buzzing overhead fluorescence, returned to something older and quieter. Most of the remaining customers left during the outage. Ryder stayed. So did Laya. She sat at the counter with a glass of milk. He'd watched Walter slide it to her without comment, the casual ease of someone doing something so habitual it had stopped requiring decision, and stared at the candle on the counter's corner. He was in his booth. The space between them felt different in the dark, less formally defined. The candlelight moved. "You scared of the dark?" he asked. She looked at him. "No." "Me neither." He paused. "Used to be." She turned on her stool slightly toward him. "What happened?" "Spent enough time in it," he said. "Stops being scary after a while. Starts being just a thing." She thought about this. "That sounds lonely." He considered the word. "Yeah," he said. "It does, doesn't it?" The candle guttered in a draft from the kitchen door. They were quiet for a while. The rain hit the windows in waves. "My dad used to say darkness was where the real stuff lived," Leia said. She said it the way children sometimes said things about their parents. Factually, a thing they'd been told that had passed into the inventory of things that existed in the world, neither endorsed nor questioned yet, just stored. "Real stuff," Ryder repeated. "Bad stuff. Things you shouldn't see." "That what you think?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think he was wrong about a lot of things." "Yeah," Ryder said. "I think so too." The lights came back on. The fluorescence buzzed to life and the diner returned to its ordinary harshness, and Leia spun back to face the counter and drank her milk, and the conversation ended the way their conversations always ended. Not with conclusion, but with a kind of mutual withdrawal, each of them stepping back to a safe distance, like two animals who had approached each other briefly and then thought better of closing the remaining gap. But she'd said, "I think he was wrong about a lot of things." That was new. That was a crack. The first time Ryder met Walter Boone, she really met him outside the narrow transactional grammar of ordering food. It happened because of the cold. The temperature dropped 18 degrees in a single night in the second week of November. It was the kind of cold that came off the flat land like a physical force, cutting through anything that wasn't properly sealed. And Ryder had driven past the property on the county road before dawn and seen that the shed's corrugated roof had a section lifted by the wind, bent back at one corner, exposing the interior. He'd pulled over. He'd sat on his bike for a long moment in the pre-dawn dark with the wind pressing cold fingers against every seam of his jacket. Then he'd ridden to the diner's back entrance and knocked. Walter answered after 2 minutes. He was in jeans and a flannel shirt, bare feet, a mug of coffee already in his hand, and he looked at Ryder with the particular expression of a large man who had decided long ago not to be easily alarmed, but who was nonetheless cataloging everything in front of him very quickly and carefully. "Roof's blown on the shed on the Hollis property," Ryder said. "Corner section. She'll be frozen by morning." Walter stared at him for a moment. Then he said quietly, "You know." "Yeah." "How long?" "A while." Walter stepped back from the door. "Come in." Mom. What happened in Walter Boone's kitchen in the next hour was not a comfortable conversation. It was two men who didn't know each other, both of whom had been carrying a secret in opposite directions, trying to figure out what to do with the collision. Walter set a second mug on the table and pushed it toward the chair across from him and sat down with his big hands wrapped around his own cup, and he looked at Ryder with the careful, measured examination of someone deciding how much to say. He said, "I've known Dale Mercer since he was 18 years old and already a disaster. Grew up 2 streets over. His mother was a decent woman who spent her life trying to compensate for his father and largely failed. Dale inherited every bad thing and none of the good ones. He said, Leia's been coming to this diner since she could walk. Her mother brought her in, Teresa. She died 4 years ago. Car accident, bad road, winter. Nothing dramatic. Just gone. Dale was already using by then. After Teresa died, it got worse. He said, "Child Services has been out 3 times in 4 years. Nothing has ever stuck. Dale is charming when he wants to be. The kind of man who can clean up well enough for a caseworker visit and fall apart again the same night." Ryder listened to all of this and turned his coffee mug slowly between his hands and didn't speak until Walter paused. "Where's he now?" Ryder said. "I don't know." Walter's jaw worked. "That's the honest answer. He left 8 weeks ago. He's done it before. Disappears for weeks, sometimes months, but he always comes back. And when he comes back..." Walter looked at him steadily. "She hides. She knows where to hide. She's been hiding from Dale Mercer her whole life. She's very good at it. She's 9 years old and sleeping in a shed." "I know." Something shifted in Walter's face, deep and tired. "I know what it is. I've been trying to figure out how to do this right. You push too hard, she runs. You've seen it. She doesn't trust help. She waits for the angle. If I put her in a room here and call Child Services, she ends up in a system that's already failed her 3 times. Or she ends up back with Dale if he surfaces and lawyers up, or she ends up somewhere worse," Ryder said. "Yes." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the wind pressed against the building. "What's your plan?" Ryder said. "Keep her close. Keep her fed. Keep her visible enough that school knows she's here and safe enough that Dale can't just appear and take her without anyone noticing." Walter paused. "And try to get her to trust something before the next shoe drops." Ryder looked at the table. He thought about the thermal blanket on the flat stone. He thought about the way she'd said, "That's it?" Like she was waiting for the catch. "There's a room in the basement," Walter said. "Heated, dry, a cot, a lamp. I've been trying to get her to take it for 2 weeks. She won't." He exhaled. "She says she'd rather have her own place." "She means she needs the exit," Ryder said. Walter looked at him. "Yeah, I think so." "Then don't take away the exit. Give her something better instead." Ryder stood up. "Fix the roof." "I'll help. But fix it as maintenance, not as rescue. Just fix the roof." Walter nodded slowly. "And I'll talk to her," Ryder said. "Not about the room, not yet, but I'll talk to her." They fixed the roof in 40 minutes in the pre-dawn dark with a roll of flashing and a caulk gun from Walter's truck. Leia was asleep inside. Ryder could see the glow of the battery lantern through the crack under the door. They worked quietly. They didn't speak to each other much. The cold was serious now, and their breath hung in the air like small flags of effort. When they were done, they stood by Walter's truck and looked at the repaired corner. "She's going to notice," Walter said. "Yeah," Ryder said. "That's the point." November deepened. The trees along Route 9 went bare, then stayed bare, and the sky took on that low flat gray of the deep Midwest winter, settling in for the long duration. Ryder's bike was in a storage unit he'd rented by the month 3 miles from the diner. He drove a truck now. The bike was too cold for serious daily riding, and something about Harlow had stopped feeling like a stop and started feeling like a place. He didn't examine that too closely either. Leia had noticed the repaired roof. She mentioned it to him in the offhand, apparently casual way she mentioned things she'd actually been thinking about carefully. The roof got fixed. Did it? Don't act like you don't know. How'd it hold up in the last storm? A pause. Then, "Fine. Good," he said. "Cold weather like this, you need a solid roof." She went back to refilling the sugar dispensers and he went back to his coffee, and neither of them said anything else about it. But something had shifted again, imperceptibly, another fraction of a degree. The needle moving toward something he couldn't name yet and was trying not to push toward for fear of watching it swing back. The other bikers started appearing in the first week of November. They came in ones and twos, never announced, always casual. A man named Cord, who had the thick-necked solidity of someone who'd spent a lot of years doing hard physical labor, and a face that was difficult to read, and a way of ordering coffee that suggested he'd been in worse diners than this, and didn't mind any of them. A man named Price, younger, quick-eyed, who read paperbacks in a booth and never seemed to be paying attention and always was. A woman named Terry who rode a red touring bike and had the calm, unhurried competence of someone who'd long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. They were Ryder's people. Not formally announced, not explained. They were just there. The way the ironbound chapter was always just there when something required the specific kind of presence that couldn't be purchased or recruited or formally organized. Walter noticed them within 2 days. He served them without comment. He was not a stupid man. He found Ryder one afternoon when the diner was empty and said quietly, "How many?" "Enough," Ryder said. "For what?" "For whatever Dale Mercer looks like when he comes back." Walter looked at him for a long moment. "There are legal ways to handle this." "Yeah," Ryder said. "We're going to use those too." He didn't tell Walter about the conversation he'd had with a family attorney in the county seat, or the call he'd made to a contact in the Social Services Oversight Office in the state capitol, or the quiet inquiry Cord had run on Dale Mercer's current whereabouts that had returned a concerning result. Dale was in a county 2 over, had been seen associating with a supply chain for a mid-level distribution operation, and had a new warrant outstanding from a failure to appear on a possession charge. He was not gone. He was circling. Ryder didn't tell Walter any of that. Not yet. What he did was come to the diner every day and sit in his booth and drink his coffee. And when Leia stopped nearby in that sidelong way she had, talked to her about things that had nothing to do with any of it. He asked her what she was reading in school. She told him. He asked what she hated. Math. He asked what she didn't hate. She thought about it for a long time and said, "The way the woods look in the morning when there's fog." He said he knew exactly what she meant. She looked at him like she'd expected him to dismiss it. "There's something honest about fog," she said. "It doesn't pretend things are clear when they're not." He looked at her. 9 years old, holes in her shoes, hands red from cold water and cleaning work, and making a statement about honesty and epistemics that would have landed without embarrassment in a graduate seminar, and felt something complicated move through him that he had no language for. "Yeah," he said. "There is." The invitation to the basement room came on a Tuesday. It came not from Walter but from Ryder, which was the reason it worked, or at least the reason she heard it, which was not the same as the reason she accepted it. He said, "Walter's got a room downstairs. Heated, dry. He's not going to charge you for it, and he's not going to tell anyone about it, and he's not going to lock you in or lock you out. Door's always open. You can leave any time." He paused. "But it's going to get down to single digits next week." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Who else knows?" "Just Walter and me." "How do I know he won't tell my—" She stopped. "He won't," Ryder said. "He's been not telling people things about you for 4 years." This information did something to her expression, a kind of recalibration. The fact that someone had been keeping her existence quiet, not out of indifference but out of protection, was apparently something she hadn't previously held space for. "I'll think about it," she said. She moved the next evening after close. Not her few things, she kept those in the shed, just herself, coming in the back entrance with the key Walter left for her under the second step, going downstairs to the room with the cot and the lamp. In the morning, Ryder was already in his booth when she came upstairs. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither said anything. Walter put a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the counter. Leia sat down and ate. Shut. There were good days in November. There were days when the diner was warm and the coffee was hot, and the low chatter of the afternoon crowd was like a kind of white noise that made everything feel temporarily manageable, and on those days Leia Mercer did something Ryder had not seen her do before. She smiled. Not at anything in particular, not performatively, just the small involuntary expression of a person whose body was getting enough warmth and food and ordinary safety that it occasionally forgot to brace for impact. Cord saw it once and said nothing, but his expression when he looked at Ryder was the expression of a man who understood exactly what it had cost to produce that small thing. Price left her a paperback on the counter one afternoon, a collection of short stories, nothing too heavy, without explanation. She picked it up and turned it over and looked at it, and then looked around the diner and nobody acknowledged it. She took it downstairs with her that night. Terry fixed the hole in her sneaker with a small tube of shoe glue one afternoon while Leia was in school, leaving the shoe on the counter repaired and the glue tube beside it without comment. Leia came back, looked at the shoe, looked at the glue tube, and put the shoe on. She didn't say anything about it to anyone. This was the language they all spoke. Practical, quiet. No drama, no claim, no expectation of gratitude, because gratitude implied a debt, and debts implied control. And control was the thing she'd spent her whole short life trying to escape. You left the glue. You fixed the roof. You put the plate on the counter. You let her take it or leave it, come or go, choose. Ryder understood this in his bones because it was how people had reached him, once, at a different crossroads. Not with demands or speeches or outstretched hands, but with the quiet provision of things that made survival slightly less total, slightly less solitary, until survival was no longer the ceiling. What he could not yet calculate was the damage that was coming, the noise that was circling. The warrant for Dale Mercer had been issued in September. It was now November. Men with warrants and habits and a history of circling eventually came back into the orbit of the one thing that was unambiguously theirs, the one thing they could still exercise authority over when everything else had slipped away. Ryder knew this. Walter knew this. The rest of the Ironbound who drifted into Harlow and settled into the town's quiet geometry, Cord at the motel on the east side, Price in the room above the auto parts store, Terry in a rental 2 blocks from the school. They all knew it. The question was whether it would happen before or after the careful architecture they'd been building had any real chance of holding. But the night it broke was not dramatic in the way Ryder had been expecting. He'd been expecting Dale to appear at the diner door, or at the property gate, or somewhere with edges and confrontation. What happened instead was that Leia overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear, and the conversation was nothing like what Dale Mercer could have done, and it destroyed something delicate in the space of 45 seconds. It was a Thursday, late, after close. Walter and Ryder were in the kitchen. They were talking about the attorney, the guardianship filing that was finally moving, the documentation Walter had accumulated over 4 years, the formal process that was going to give this arrangement a legal skeleton before Dale resurfaced. The conversation was practical, quiet. They were not careful enough about the door. Ryder said, "The attorney says 6 to 8 weeks once the petition's filed. In the meantime, keep her hidden." He meant it legally. He meant hidden from Dale's potential interference, from the risk of Dale appearing and asserting parental rights before the filing was complete. He meant the basement room, the school's discreet records, the small circle of people who knew where she was. What Leia heard, from the hallway outside the kitchen door, was, "Keep her hidden." He would think about this later, about how those 3 words sounded to a child whose entire history, with adults who kept her hidden, was a history of being concealed for their convenience, controlled for their purposes, made invisible because her visibility was inconvenient to someone's arrangement, about how the sentence "keep her hidden" sounded like every other sentence that had ever started with apparent care and ended with a cage. By 4 in the morning, the basement room was empty. The paperback Price had left was on the cot. The repaired sneaker was on the floor. She had taken only what she'd come with. The little girl was gone. Ryder found out at 6 when he arrived at the diner, and Walter met him at the back door with an expression that required no words. He stood in the basement doorway for a moment and looked at the empty cot and the paperback on the pillow and the sneaker on the floor and felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Then he went upstairs, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat in his booth. Walter stood at the counter. "We should—" "I know," Ryder said. He took out his phone and called Cord. He sent Price to the school on the outside chance she'd gone there first. He asked Terry to drive the county road and check the property. He described the shed, the woods behind it, the creek bed he'd noticed running east along the tree line. Then he put the phone in his pocket and looked at the gray November morning through the diner window and felt the full weight of what had just happened. Not the tactical problem of locating her, not the legal exposure or the schedule disruption or any of the practical architecture. Just the fact that she had heard those 3 words and known, instantly and without any remaining doubt, that safety was another name for something that was going to close around her. And she had run. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees along Route 9. The neon sign above the door flickered. The O blinked twice and then held its light for a moment before going dark again. Somewhere in the cold and the gray and the thin morning, a 9-year-old girl who had been moving towards something for the first time in her life was now moving away from it as fast as her small body could carry her. And Ryder Kane sat in his corner booth, hands around his coffee cup, and asked himself the question that didn't have a clean answer, whether the thing she was running from was the danger, or whether this time it was him. The search lasted 11 hours. Ryder knew the number because he checked his watch when he finally stopped moving. 9:47 in the evening, cold enough that his breath hung in the air like smoke even inside the truck cab, and counted backward to the 6 a.m. moment when Walter had met him at the back door with that expression. 11 hours. 44 miles of back roads. 7 abandoned structures, 2 creek crossings on foot, 1 call to the county sheriff's non-emergency line that produced a form number and a promise that someone would look into it within 48 hours. 48 hours. He'd hung up without responding because the alternative was saying something that would make the next 48 hours considerably more complicated. Cord had covered the eastern section, the creek bed, the tree line past the Hollis property, 2 miles of abandoned rail corridor that ran behind the county fairgrounds. He'd found a candy wrapper and a footprint in soft mud near a culvert that might have been hers or might have been anyone's. He'd photographed it and sent the photo to Ryder without comment. Price had gone to the school. The building was locked, being a Thursday before first bell, but he'd sat in the parking lot until 7:30 when the custodian arrived and then had a conversation about whether any child might have sought shelter somewhere on the grounds overnight. The custodian had not seen anyone. He'd let Price walk the perimeter. Nothing. Terry had driven the county road twice and then gone methodically through the residential streets on the south side of Harlow, the blocks of small houses, the alleys, the church parking lots, looking for a small figure in a gray hoodie moving in the early morning dark. She'd come back empty at noon and gone out again at 2 and come back empty again at 5, and by then her jaw was set in a way that made Cord stop looking at her directly. Ryder had gone everywhere else. He'd thought about where he would have gone, at 9 years old, running from something, and then stopped himself because he hadn't been 9, he'd been 17, and the geography of a child's fear was different from the geography of an adolescent's, and he didn't know her well enough yet to map it accurately. He'd gone instead on instinct and accumulation. The playground 3 blocks from the elementary school, the equipment too exposed in daylight but with a covered slide structure that might provide minimal shelter. The decommissioned rail depot on the west side, its loading dock still half covered by a rotting overhang. The drainage tunnel under the Route 9 overpass that older kids used as a hangout spot. He'd found beer cans and a sleeping bag that hadn't been slept in recently. He'd found no Laya. By 6 in the evening, he'd been operating on 2 cups of cold coffee and something that wasn't quite fear but was fear's operational cousin. The focused, motionless interior state of a man who had learned long ago that panic was expensive and that the opposite of panic wasn't calm but precision. He drove. He looked. He didn't let himself think past the next grid square. It was Price who found the lead at 7:15, not from driving, but from the paperback. Boss. He'd gone back to the basement room and picked up the book Leia had left on the cot. It was a collection of short stories. He'd chosen it deliberately, something without a continuous narrative that she could pick up and put down, enter and exit without commitment. She dog-eared 1 page, page 67. He'd read the story on that page twice, and then he'd read the note the previous owner of the book had written in pencil in the margin at the bottom of the page. The book had come from the used shelf at the hardware store, priced at 50 cents, and somebody named Jay Holloway had read it before him and written 3 words at the bottom of page 67 in a small, careful hand. Warm here, still. It was not a message. It was just an annotation, the way readers sometimes talk to themselves in margins. But Price had stared at those 3 words for a long time, and then he had driven to the hardware store and asked the owner where the used books came from. The owner said the library ran a quarterly donation drop. Books came in from all over town, got sorted, priced, sold. He kept a box in the back for anything that didn't sell, donated it back. Price had asked if there was anything near the library where a child might shelter overnight. The owner had looked at him for a moment with the cautious expression of a man deciding something. Then he'd said, "The library's got a 24-hour vestibule, newspapers, return slot, stays heated. The librarian lets certain people sleep there overnight in winter, unofficially. She's been doing it for years. Price called Ryder at 7:22. Ryder was at the library by 7:31. The vestibule was a small glass-enclosed space between the library's outer and inner doors, maybe 6 feet deep, 10 feet wide, a metal bench along one wall, and a return slot and newspaper rack along the other. It was heated to about 60 degrees, which was not warm but was the difference between hypothermia risk and discomfort. The inner library door was locked after hours. She was on the bench. She'd used her hoodie as a partial pillow, folded against the metal armrest, and she was curled on her side with her knees drawn up and her face turned toward the wall. She was awake. He could tell by the tension in her shoulders before he'd even opened the outer door, the way they pulled slightly inward, the body preparing. He opened the outer door slowly. He sat down on the opposite end of the bench, 6 feet of cold metal between them, and he didn't say anything right away. He looked at his hands. He let the silence settle. "You're not going to yell," she said. Not a question. "No. Walter sent you. I came on my own." A pause. "That's not true. I called Walter when I found you. He's at the diner. He stayed there." He paused. "He figured if you came back, someone should be there." She was quiet. Her shoulders hadn't loosened. "Laya." He stopped. Tried again. "What you heard. I know what I heard." "You heard 3 words," he said, "out of a conversation that was about keeping you safe from your father. Legal safe, not—" He stopped again. The words weren't coming out right. They were coming out like an explanation, and she didn't need an explanation. She needed something else, and he was not sure he knew how to produce it. "I'm not good at this," he said. She turned her head slightly, not looking at him directly but no longer facing entirely away. "Good at what?" "Saying the right thing in the right order." A long pause. The glass vestibule hummed faintly with the heat system. "I know what keep her hidden sounds like," he said. "I know it sounds like the thing people say before they do something with you that you didn't agree to. I know that because I have heard people say things that sound like protection and mean something else." He looked at the wall. "What Walter and I were talking about was a legal filing, to keep your father from taking you back before a judge can hear the case. That's what we were hiding you from, not anything else." The silence this time was different. He could feel her listening inside it. "How do I know?" she said. "You don't," he said. "That's the honest answer. You can't know from the outside. You have to decide whether to believe it or not." He paused. "I can't make that decision for you. I wouldn't if I could." She was quiet for a very long time. Outside, a car moved past on the library street, its headlight sweeping briefly across the glass. "I'm cold," she said. "I know. I don't want to go back to the shed." "You don't have to." He stood up. "The room's still there. Walter didn't touch it." She sat up slowly, uncurling from the bench, her face pale in the vestibule's thin light, and her eyes doing that thing they did, reading him with the flat, comprehensive attention of a person who had learned to read people the way others read weather, looking for the sign of the storm underneath the apparent sky. Whatever she found, it was enough. She stood up and walked past him to the outer door, and he followed her out into the November dark, and neither of them said anything else until they reached the truck. The story of what Ryder had said in that vestibule reached Cord by 9 o'clock and reached Price by 10, and by the time Ryder got back to his motel room, it was past 11, and his phone had 2 messages on it. The first was from Cord. "We need to talk." The second was from Price. "Tomorrow. Early." He sat on the edge of the motel bed and looked at both messages and felt the shape of what was coming. He'd known it was coming for a week, maybe longer. He just hadn't wanted to name it while there were other things to attend to first. They met the next morning at a gas station 2 miles east of town, the kind with a small attached diner that ran a 6 a.m. breakfast counter for truckers and farmhands and anyone else who needed coffee before the rest of the county woke up. Terry was there already when Ryder arrived, sitting in the far booth with her hands around a mug. Her red touring jacket hung on the peg beside the booth. Cord was at the counter. Price came in 3 minutes after Ryder and sat down without taking his jacket off. They ordered. The waitress moved away. The counter was 3 seats occupied by men who were clearly not interested in the booth in the corner, and the booth was theirs. Cord spoke first. He spoke looking at his coffee, not at Ryder, which was its own kind of statement. The attorney. What about her? You went to see her without telling us. I told Walter. Walter's not ironbound. Cord's voice was flat and even, the kind of flat that wasn't anger but was the condition directly adjacent to anger, the holding pattern before something decided which direction to move. You brought us into this. That means the decisions get made together. The attorney meeting was recon, Ryder said, finding out what the options were. I wasn't filing anything without a conversation. But you were going to file. Yeah. And when were you planning to tell us that? The diner counter hummed. Someone's toast popped. Ryder picked up his coffee and looked at Cord steadily. I'm telling you now. Cord finally looked at him. His face was the face of a man who had spent a long time being patient and was running a calculation on how much longer that patience had a reasonable, useful life. This started as eyes on a situation. Monitor, intervene if Dale showed, make sure the kid had cover. That's still what it is. No, Cord said. It's not. You've got a legal filing in motion, a social services contact in the Capitol, Walter Boone in a formal alliance, and a kid sleeping in a room in that building. That's not eyes on a situation. He set his mug down. That's a commitment. The words sat on the table between them. Terry spoke without looking up. He's not wrong, Ryder. I know he's not wrong. So what are we doing? Price said. He was the youngest of them by 8 years, quick and quiet. And when he chose to speak directly, it was usually because he'd waded through enough circumlocution to want the conversation to move. Because if we're committed, then we commit properly. That means information structure. That means contingency for when Dale surfaces. That means legal liability mapped out before someone does something that can't be undone. He paused. And it means you stop making moves without the table. Ryder looked at all 3 of them. Terry had her hands around her mug and her eyes on the table. Cord was watching him with that flat, patient attention. Price had sat back slightly, giving him room to answer. These were people he'd ridden with for years. People he trusted in the specific, weighted way you trusted the person beside you when the situation required that trust to be load-bearing. He'd been making solo decisions for long enough that the habit had calcified into instinct, and instinct was a thing that didn't announce itself as a pattern until someone named it from the outside. The filing, he said. I'll walk everyone through it today. Dale's warrant status. Cord, you've got more current intel than me on his location. I need that on the table. Terry, the school contact. Is that still solid? She'll call me if he shows up anywhere near the building, Terry said. She's been notified. Price. The building? I want eyes on the back entrance after dark. Rotating. Price nodded. And I won't make another move on the legal side without a full briefing first. He looked at Cord. That's what you needed to hear. Cord held his gaze for a moment. Something shifted in it, not warmth exactly. Cord operated below the waterline of warmth, but something that was the structural equivalent of it, an acknowledgement. The warrant, Cord said. It's not 2 counties over anymore. Ryder went still. Dale Mercer was seen in Harlow yesterday afternoon, Cord said. Gas station on the west side around 3 o'clock, paid cash. Didn't stop long. He paused. He knows she's here. The rest of the morning moved fast in the way of things that had been predicted and still weren't ready for. Ryder drove to the diner and found Walter in the kitchen, working the morning prep with the focused economy of a man who cooked when he was afraid because there was nothing else to do with his hands. Ryder told him about Dale's sighting. Walter set down his spatula and stood very still for a moment, then picked the spatula back up. Does she know? Walter said. No. She should. Not yet. Ryder sat down at the prep counter. If we tell her now, she runs again. We need the filing to progress far enough that there's actual legal scaffolding before she finds out her father's in town. Walter looked at him. How far along? The attorney says initial petition could be filed by end of next week. Once it's filed, a court date gets set, and there's a legal record that complicates Dale taking her without a fight. A week? Yeah. Walter turned back to the flat top and adjusted the burner and said nothing for 30 seconds. Then, You're asking me to look her in the eye every day this week and not say anything. I know. She's getting better at reading people, Walter said. She'll know something's wrong. Tell her it's about Dale. Tell her we think he might come back soon and we're working on a plan. That's true. Don't give her the timeline or the location sighting. Ryder paused. She can handle the threat. It's the proximity that'll trigger the flight response. Walter's jaw worked slowly. He cracked an egg onto the flat top and watched it cook. You're asking me to manage information to a child who has been managed her whole life, he said. I'm asking you to keep a specific piece of timing to yourself for 7 days so that the thing we've been building for weeks doesn't collapse before it has legal standing. There's a difference between those two things that feels significant. I know, Ryder said. I'm not asking you to like it. Walter plated the egg and set the plate aside and looked at Ryder with something that was not quite accusation but was in its vicinity. She trusted us, he said. She came back last night when she had every reason not to. That means something. I don't want to spend it. Neither do I, Ryder said, which is why the filing needs to be complete before any of it comes apart. The kitchen was quiet except for the sizzle of the flat top. Walter wiped his hands on his apron. 7 days, he said finally. 7 days. Leia came in at her usual time, 3:30, backpack over one shoulder, moving through the diner with the resumed regularity of someone who had decided to return and was going to behave as though the departure had not occurred. Not because she'd forgotten it or forgiven it, but because she operated on the pragmatic understanding that shelter and food were not available in the vestibule indefinitely and that the alternatives were worse. She did her homework at the counter. She ate the soup Walter set out without comment. She refilled napkin dispensers. When she passed Ryder's booth, she stopped for a moment, not quite looking at him, but positioned toward him in a way that was close enough. The story I was reading, she said, the one on page 67, in the book. What about it? There's a character who finds out everything she thought was true was a half-truth. She paused. She burns the whole house down. Yeah, he said, I read it. What do you think she should have done instead? He looked at her. Ask the question first, before burning anything. A pause. What if asking was too dangerous? Then you burn the question in your mind for a while first. See if it's still on fire the next morning. She considered this for a long moment, with that flat, comprehensive attention. Is that what you do? She said. Used to, he said. Got better at asking. She went back to the counter. He watched her go and kept his face very still. 7 days. Dale Mercer called the diner on Saturday. Darlene answered. She didn't know who it was at first. He introduced himself as an old friend of Walter's, his voice careful and easy, and carrying that particular warmth of someone who'd practiced at seeming unthreatening. He asked if Walter was around. Darlene said Walter was in the kitchen. Could she take a message? He said no thanks. He'd try back, and hung up. Darlene mentioned it to Walter an hour later, the way you mentioned ordinary things, without urgency. Walter came out of the kitchen and found Ryder in his booth and sat down across from him for the first time since Ryder had been coming here. He didn't order anything. He put both hands flat on the table and said very quietly, "He called." Ryder didn't move. What did he say? Nothing specific, just testing the water. Walter's hands were pressed flat with a pressure that was visibly about containing something. He knows she comes here. He's always known she comes here. He brought her here. He's establishing whether I'll answer. What are you going to do when he calls back? Answer, Walter said. Normally. Not give him anything, but also not spook him. He's going to ask to see her. I know. You need to be able to say no without giving him a reason to escalate before we're ready. Walter's eyes were very steady. I've been saying no to Dale Mercer in various ways for 4 years, he said. I know how it sounds. I know how long it holds. He paused. It doesn't hold long, Ryder. I know. What's our actual fallback if the filing doesn't go through in time? Ryder looked at the table. The honest answer was that the fallback involved the people sitting in this county who had the specific and well-practiced ability to make certain situations very difficult for certain men to navigate. The honest answer was that those people were already positioned, already briefed, and that their presence in Harlow was not decorative. We cross that when we get there, he said. Walter looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his face. Not quite suspicion, not quite relief, but the complicated expression of a man deciding to trust something he didn't have all the information on because the alternative was worse. 7 days, Walter said. 6 now, Ryder said. Leia noticed something was different on Sunday. She noticed because she was exceptional at noticing. It was a survival skill that had been sharpened over years of reading adult behavior for signs. The specific way a man's voice changed when he'd been drinking versus when he was sober. The particular quality of silence in a room where something had just been decided. The way people moved when they were pretending things were normal. She'd developed these skills in a context where getting them wrong had consequences, and skills learned in that context tended to be very accurate. She noticed that Walter was warm to her in a way that was approximately 10% more deliberate than usual. She noticed that Ryder was sitting in his booth doing the crossword he never did, but today was doing pen moving across the grid. And it was the movement itself that was wrong, the slight overperformance of nonchalance. She noticed that Darlene had straightened the sugar dispensers twice in 20 minutes, which was something Darlene did when she was processing information she'd been asked not to share. She didn't say anything on Sunday. She came in on Monday and did her homework and ate her soup and worked the closing shift and went downstairs to the basement room and lay on the cot and looked at the ceiling. She came in on Tuesday the same way. On Tuesday evening, when the diner was at its quietest, just Ryder in his booth and Walter visible through the kitchen window and the last customer having paid and left 10 minutes ago, she stopped beside Ryder's table and said, "What are you all not telling me?" He looked up from the crossword. He looked at her face. He felt something settle into his chest that was specifically the weight of the decision he'd made with Walter 5 days ago, pressing down. "Sit down," he said. She looked at the seat across from him. She hadn't sat at his table yet. In all the weeks of their conversations, she'd always been standing, always positioned with the option to move. She sat down. "Your father," he said. "He's in Harlow." She didn't move. Her face didn't change in any visible external way, but something happened in her eyes. A kind of withdrawal, like a light source dimming at its source, the surface remaining the same while the thing behind it went elsewhere. "How long?" she said. "We think he's been nearby since Thursday or Friday. He called the diner Saturday." "He called?" Her voice was flat. Walter spoke to Darlene. "Your father didn't give his name." Walter recognized the pattern. "What does he want?" "You," Ryder said. "That's what he always wants when he surfaces, not because of—" He stopped. "Not because he loves you" was a sentence he was not going to let himself finish, because it had too many implications, and none of them belonged in this conversation right now. "Because you're the one thing he still has legal authority over. And men like your father use that when everything else has slipped away." She was very still. "There's a legal filing," he said. "Walter's attorney. It's been in motion for a week. It's not complete yet. It needs a few more days." He looked at her directly. "I should have told you sooner. I was wrong not to." The silence was different from any silence they'd had before. It had a different density. He could feel her processing, the way he could sometimes feel the change in air pressure before weather arrived. "You knew on Thursday," she said. "Thursday night. And today is Tuesday." "Yes." 5 days, she said. "Yes." Something moved across her face that was not anger exactly. It was more precise than anger, more considered. It was the expression of someone updating a record. "You said you'd ask the question first," she said, "before burning anything." "I said that, yeah. That was Friday." He felt the weight of that sentence land exactly where she'd aimed it. He didn't try to deflect it. "Yeah," he said. "It was." She looked at the table. Then she looked up at him, and her eyes were very steady. "I'm not running," she said. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't let himself expect it. "I know what running gets me," she said. "Cold. Alone. And he still finds me eventually. He always does." She paused. "I want to know about the filing. Everything, not the version you decide I can handle. Everything." "Okay," he said, "and I want to know what happens if he shows up before it's done." He looked at her. 9 years old. Both hands flat on the table, mirror of the way Walter had sat across from him 4 days ago. Same posture, different person, Different version of the same fundamental demand. Don't manage me. You know the people who've been coming into the diner, he said. The biker guys. And the woman. They're here because of you. They've been here for 3 weeks. He paused. If Dale shows up before the filing goes through, he's going to encounter a situation that gives him an opportunity to make a different choice. She thought about this. What if he doesn't make a different choice? Then he's going to have a harder morning than he planned on. Something passed across her face. Not relief. Not exactly. Something more complex than relief. The complicated expression of a person who had spent their entire life waiting for the moment when the weight of another person's bad decisions would finally stop being their responsibility to survive alone. She nodded once, precise and complete. Okay, she said. She stood up and went back to the closing tasks, moving through the diner with her usual quiet efficiency, and Ryder sat in his booth and watched her go and felt the strange, suspended quality of a moment when everything has been said and nothing has yet been resolved. Outside, on Route 9, a pair of headlights swept the parking lot and moved on. Cord delivered the rest of the intelligence on Wednesday morning. He sat across from Ryder at the same gas station counter, just the two of them this time, and he laid it out the way he laid everything out. Flat and sequential, without editorializing, the information presented as a structure that Ryder could then decide what to do with. Dale Mercer had been staying at the Lakeview Motor Inn, 6 miles north of Harlow on a state route. He'd checked in under a different name, not difficult to verify because Cord had a contact at the inn's management, the kind of informal information network that small towns generated organically after enough years of proximity. He'd been there since Wednesday of last week, longer than Thursday, longer than they'd thought. He'd made contact with 2 individuals from the distribution operation Cord had tracked previously. Both were known, neither with active warrants in this county, but both with records. The nature of the contact was unclear. Could have been supply. Could have been a favor being called in. Could have been something else entirely. And on Tuesday evening, he'd been seen parked on the county road, 200 yards from the diner. How long was he there? Ryder said. 40 minutes. Then he drove away. Ryder looked at his coffee for a long time. 40 minutes. Leah had been inside that building for 40 minutes while her father sat in a car 200 yards away in the dark, and Ryder hadn't known. He's not going to wait for the filing, Ryder said. No, Cord said. He's not. He's watching for a pattern, a time when she leaves alone. She doesn't leave alone anymore. You or Walter or one of us is always... He's patient, Ryder said. He'll wait until he sees a gap. Cord looked at him. Or he'll make one. The sentence hung in the air between them, with the particular gravity of a sentence that doesn't need elaboration. Make one. Create a circumstance where she ended up outside the building, outside the coverage, because something had pulled the people who were watching in a different direction. A distraction. A conflict. Something that required attention elsewhere for long enough. He's got company, Ryder said. 2 men? Cord said. Probably. So does he. Cord nodded. I need to call Price and Terry in. This goes from passive coverage to active today. Yeah. And the attorney. I'll call her this morning. Push for an emergency petition filing. There's a provision for imminent risk situations. She mentioned it as an option. Does Leah know about the car on the road? No, Ryder said, and I'm not telling her yet. Cord looked at him. She told me she's not running, Ryder said. That's new. That's something I don't want to break by handing her information that might change the calculation. He paused. If she knows he was sitting 200 yards away watching for her, she might decide running is still the safest move. And if she runs this time, she runs toward him, Ryder said. Eventually, because that's what happens when you run without a plan. You end up running in circles, and he's patient enough to wait at the center. He looked at his hands. So I need the filing done, and I need her inside that building, and I need 2 more days. Cord was quiet for a moment. 2 days, he said. Maybe 3. And if he moves before then? Ryder looked up. There was nothing in his face that required a sentence to complete. It was just a look. The look of a man who had made specific decisions a long time ago about what he was and was not willing to allow, and who was very clear-eyed about the fact that those decisions sometimes had operational costs. Cord nodded once. They drank their coffee, and neither of them said anything else for a long time. Till Thursday passed without incident. Friday morning, Ryder got a call from the attorney at 8:42. The emergency petition had been accepted. Filing completed. A court date was set for 3 weeks out. In the interim, the filing itself created a legal record. If Dale attempted to remove Leah from the county without a court appearance, he'd be in violation of an active petition with documented evidence of neglect, abandonment, and a standing warrant from another county. It wasn't a cage, but it was a structure. He sat in the truck in the diner parking lot and held his phone and looked at the building. Through the window, he could see the diner's morning crowd, the counter stools occupied, the coffee moving. He could see the top of Leah's head at the homework spot on the far end of the counter, visible above the divider. He went inside. He sat in his booth. He didn't call her over. She'd see him. She'd come when she was ready. He ordered coffee and waited and watched the morning proceed. She came over at 10:15 in a slow stretch, moving with a tray of clean coffee cups toward the counter storage. She stopped beside his table. "The filing," he said. "It went through." She held the tray with both hands and looked at him. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means your father can't take you out of this county without violating a court order. It means there's a legal record. It means in 3 weeks there's a hearing where a judge is going to hear everything Walter has been documenting for 4 years. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "And after the hearing, guardianship to Walter, if the judge rules correctly." He paused. "I believe the judge will rule correctly. And if she doesn't, then we keep going. There are more steps. It doesn't stop." She looked at him with that flat, comprehensive attention. Then she looked at the coffee cups on her tray. "Okay," she said. She moved toward the counter storage. He watched her go. He picked up his coffee. The diner went on around him. Orders called, plates landing, the bell above the front door jingling. He was on his second cup when Price appeared in the doorway, moving fast, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a man arriving with ordinary news. He crossed the diner in 6 steps and sat down across from Ryder and said, very quietly, "Dale Mercer just walked into the elementary school. He told the front desk he was picking up his daughter early. They're stalling him, but the woman at the desk said he has ID. He has legal ID, and she's not sure what she can—" Ryder was on his feet and moving before Price finished the sentence. Behind him, the bell above the diner door swung and rang with the force of his exit, and the sound of it was still moving through the air when his truck's engine turned over in the parking lot, and across the diner counter Leah looked up from her homework and watched the window and understood, with the deep, cold certainty of a child who had read adult behavior for her entire short life and was never wrong, that something had just moved from one state to another and could not be moved back. The elementary school was 4 minutes from the diner at legal speed. Ryder drove it in 2.5. He pulled into the drop-off lane at an angle that blocked the exit and was out of the truck before the engine finished its shut-down shutter, moving across the wet asphalt toward the front entrance with the kind of deliberate speed that wasn't running, but covered ground faster than running because it didn't waste anything on urgency's performance. The morning had turned gray and cold, a thin rain coming down at a slant, and the school's glass front doors reflected the pale sky and his own dark shape approaching. Terry's car was already in the visitor lot. She'd gotten there first. He pushed through the front doors into the school's lobby smell. Industrial cleaner, construction paper, the particular warmth of a building that housed a few hundred children and ran its heat high to compensate. The woman at the front desk was in her 50s, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she was doing the specific thing that people with no formal authority and a genuine instinct for protection did in situations like this. She was moving very slowly, finding reasons to delay, asking questions she didn't need the answers to, buying minutes. Dale Mercer was standing at the counter. Ryder had built a picture of him from second-hand information, from the accumulated description in court documents and Walter's accounting and the inferences available from what Leah had and hadn't said. The picture he'd built was of a man in decline, a man who'd been good-looking once and knew it and was watching that knowledge become less useful year by year. The picture was roughly accurate. Dale was mid-40s, lean in the way of someone who forgot to eat regularly, dark-haired, going gray at the temples, wearing a canvas jacket that was clean but had the slightly off quality of clothes that had been in storage and recently retrieved. He stood at the counter with the careful ease of someone performing normalcy for an audience he didn't entirely trust. Terry was at the lobby's far end, near the corridor that led to the classrooms, positioned with the apparent purposelessness of someone waiting for a child. She wasn't looking at Dale. She was looking at her phone, but her posture was the posture of a woman who was tracking every movement in the room without needing to use her eyes. Dale turned when Ryder came in. He registered Ryder in the way that men with certain histories registered physical presence, quickly, comprehensively, a rapid calibration of size and bearing, and the specific quality of attention a person was carrying. His face didn't change. He was good at that. Ryder walked to the counter and stood beside him, not close enough to be threatening, not far enough to suggest indifference. "Mr. Mercer," he said. Dale looked at him. "Do I know you?" "No." Ryder looked at the desk clerk. "Could you give us a minute?" The desk clerk, who had been looking for any exit from the situation that didn't require her to make a decision, accepted this one with visible relief and moved toward the copy room. They stood at the counter. The lobby was quiet. Rain tapped against the glass doors. "You're here for Leia," Ryder said. "I'm here for my daughter," Dale said. "Yeah." His voice was even, practiced. "And you're here because a filing was completed this morning," Ryder said. "Emergency petition for temporary guardianship. Judge Harlan's court. You take Leia out of this building today, you're in violation of an active court order in addition to the existing warrant from Clement County." Something moved through Dale's face. Not surprise. He'd known something was coming. Men like Dale always knew when the net was tightening. They developed a sensitivity to it. But the specific shape of what had arrived was clearly not exactly what he'd been expecting. "Walter Boone," Dale said. It wasn't a question. "Among others." Dale looked at him for a long moment. He was doing the calculation, reading Ryder the way Ryder had read him, cataloging the patches, the scar, the quality of the stillness, identifying what he was dealing with. "You're not law," Dale said. "No," Ryder said. "I'm not." "So you've got no standing here." "The court order has standing," Ryder said. "I'm just here to make sure you know it exists before you make a decision you can't walk back." Dale smiled. It was a particular smile, one that Ryder recognized, the smile of a man who'd been using charm as a tool for so long that it had become reflexive, deployed even when it had nothing to work with, a habit that had outlasted its usefulness and didn't know it yet. "My daughter," Dale said, "is mine. Whatever Walter Boone filed, whatever you people think you've arranged, she's mine. A judge is going to look at a father coming to get his child and a group of people with no legal relationship to her who've been keeping her away from him. And a judge is going to look at 4 years of documentation," Ryder said. "School records across 3 counties, medical records, child services reports, testimony from every adult in Harlow who's interacted with Leia in the past 2 months. He paused. "And the warrant." Dale's smile stayed in place, but something behind it shifted. "Take the morning," Ryder said. "Talk to a lawyer before you decide anything. That's the advice I'm giving you, and it's the only time I'm going to give it." He held Dale's gaze for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked to the far end of the lobby and stood near Terry without looking at her. Behind them, Dale stood at the counter for 30 seconds. Then he walked to the glass doors and pushed through them into the rain. They watched his shape cross the parking lot, get into a truck, and pull out. Terry said very quietly, "He'll be back?" "Yeah," Ryder said. "Tonight or tomorrow." Not alone. Ryder looked at the glass doors at the rain-slicked parking lot beyond them. "No," he said. "Not alone." He called the school principal from the parking lot and gave her the court filing number. He told her Leia was not to be released to anyone but Walter Boone or Terry Wallace until further notice. The principal, who had clearly been expecting a call of this nature for some time, based on the speed with which she absorbed the information, confirmed this without argument. He sat in the truck with the engine running and the heat on and his hands on the steering wheel and looked at the rain. Terry knocked on the passenger window and he unlocked it, and she got in and they sat there for a moment. "The 2 men cord flagged," she said, "from the distribution operation." "Yeah." Cord got a name on one of them this morning, before all this. She paused. Marcus Feld. You know that name. He did. He sat with it for a moment. Feld worked supply routes for a distribution network out of Sutter City 3 years ago. We had a situation with that network. Ironbound had a situation with that network, Terry said. Specifically the Eastern Corridor. Specifically, you and Cord. He looked at her. What are you saying? I'm saying Dale Mercer didn't end up connected to Marcus Feld by accident. She turned in the seat to face him. Someone put them together. Someone who knew Feld would be useful to whatever Dale's trying to do here, and someone who might have a specific interest in the fact that you're in Harlow. The rain intensified briefly, drumming hard against the truck's roof, then settled back. You think this isn't about Leia, he said. I think this started about Leia, Terry said. I think something else walked in through the door that Dale opened. He looked at the windshield. The water ran down it in uneven tributaries. Get Cord, he said. Full table, tonight. They met at the garage Price had rented on the east side of town, a single-bay commercial unit with a roll-up door and a drain in the center of the concrete floor and fluorescent tubes on chains that cast hard, unflattering light over everything. It smelled of old oil and cold air, and the specific neutral smell of a space that was being used temporarily by people who needed a room without witnesses. Price had a folding table set up with a laptop and a road map of the county marked in 3 colors. Cord was leaning against the near wall with his arms crossed, and his stillness was the stillness of a man who had been thinking hard for several hours and had arrived somewhere he didn't entirely like. Terry stood near the roll-up door, which was down. The rain had gotten heavier. Ryder arrived last. He pulled the roll-up door's side entrance shut behind him and stood for a moment, looking at all 3 of them in the harsh fluorescent light. Tell me about Feld, he said to Cord. Cord uncrossed his arms. Marcus Feld dropped off the Sutter City Network's radar about 18 months ago. We assumed he'd moved operations or gotten picked up. There was a federal sweep of that network's upper tier. Some people went away, some people ran. He paused. He didn't run. He contracted out. Independent work, smaller operations, different geography. He's been working the county lines out here for about 8 months. And he connected with Dale when? 6 weeks ago, maybe 7. Cord's jaw was set. Around the same time Dale disappeared from Leia's life. Not a coincidence, Price said. No, Cord said. But here's the part that isn't about Dale. He moved to the table and pointed at the map. The county road that ran past the diner was marked in red, a cluster of marks around the east side of Harlow, a route running north toward the state line. Feld's been using this corridor for transport, small loads, frequent runs, not drawing attention. He's been using it for 8 months, and it's been clean. He looked at Ryder. Then Ironbound shows up in Harlow. The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere outside, rain hit the metal roll-up door in a steady low percussion. He thinks we're here for the corridor, Ryder said. He thinks you're here for the corridor, Cord said. Specifically, you. Because of Sutter City. Ryder looked at the map. The geometry of it assembled itself in his mind. Feld's operation running quietly through a county nobody was watching, and then a scarred man with an ironbound patch sitting in a diner on the main corridor for weeks. From Feld's perspective, from the outside, it looked like exactly one thing. It looked like intelligence gathering before a move against the route. He put Dale onto it, Ryder said. I think he told Dale that there was something worth knowing about why Ironbound was in Harlow, Cord said. Dale needed resources and Feld needed information. They made an arrangement. So Dale coming to the school today, was Dale doing 2 things at once, Terry said. Getting his daughter, which he genuinely wants for his own reasons, and drawing you out. Getting a read on your response, your numbers, your positioning. She paused. Feld was in a car on the main road. I made him when I drove past. He was watching the school. Ryder stood very still. They ran us, Price said. This morning was reconnaissance. Yes, Cord said. The garage was very quiet for a moment. The rain outside had a quality of persistence, of something that had settled in and wasn't going anywhere. Ryder walked to the far wall and stood with his back to the room, looking at the bare concrete block wall. He was running the implications. The full structure of it. Feld's operation used the county corridor. Ironbound in Harlow looked like a threat to that corridor. Feld and Dale had made an arrangement. Dale's access to information about the people surrounding Laya in exchange for Feld's resources in whatever Dale was planning. And this morning's school visit had been a probe, not a genuine attempt. A calibration, which meant the genuine attempt was still coming. And it was going to be designed around what they'd learned this morning, around Ryder's response, around the school's vulnerability, around the gap between the filing's legal protection and the actual physical ability to enforce it. He turned back to the room. Leia can't be at the school, he said, and she can't be at the diner. Both are now known positions. Walter's building, Cord said. Dale knows that building. He knows the layout. He's been there. So we move her, Price said. Where? It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question, the most important one, and Ryder could see from Price's face that he didn't have an answer and knew it. Nobody had an answer. Ryder looked at the map. He looked at the marked corridor, the cluster of east side points, the route north. He looked at the shape of the county and the roads that crossed it, and the places where cover existed and the places where it didn't. Cord, he said, the motel, Lakeview. Dale's staying there. Is Feld? A pause. I don't know. Find out. He looked at Price. I need the building's back exit surveilled from now until this resolves. Every hour, rotating, no gaps. He looked at Terry. The school principal. She needs to understand that releasing any information about Laya's attendance pattern to anyone is a security issue, not just releasing Laya. Information. Terry nodded. And I need to talk to Walter, Ryder said. Alone. Mutt. Walter was in the diner kitchen when Ryder arrived, which was where Walter always was when things were going wrong. Hands in something concrete, producing something real, because the alternative was standing still with the fear, and he'd made a long practice of not letting it do that. Ryder sat on the prep counter stool and waited until Walter set down the knife he'd been using and turned. Tell me about Marcus Feld, Ryder said. Walter's face didn't change, but something happened in it that wasn't the absence of change. It was the presence of a very controlled stillness, the expression of a man making a decision about something quickly. Where did you hear that name? Walter said. He's connected to Dale, through a distribution network running the county road. Ryder watched him. You knew that. Walter turned back to the counter. He put both hands flat on the surface. He looked at the wall in front of him. Not about the corridor, Walter said. Not about what they were running. He exhaled. I knew Feld had been in contact with Dale. I found out about 3 weeks ago. One of the regulars mentioned seeing them together at a bar east of town. He paused. I didn't know what it meant. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know what it meant, Walter said again, and there was something in his voice now. Not defensiveness, but something older and more complicated, a weariness. Because every time I got information I wasn't certain about, I made a decision about whether it was going to help or make things worse, and most of the time, Walter. He stopped. Is there anything else? Ryder said. Anything you decided to manage? Anything you made a call on without telling me? The kitchen was very quiet. The flat top ticked with cooling metal. Outside, the rain moved against the building in slow waves. Walter turned from the counter. He looked at Ryder with the expression of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was trying to decide if the moment had finally arrived when putting it down was possible. Dale Mercer didn't just disappear 8 weeks ago, Walter said. Ryder waited. He came to me first. Walter's voice was lower now. He came to the diner at closing, 6 weeks before he disappeared. He was using, I could see it, the way he moved, the way he talked. He told me he was in trouble. Debt to people who didn't negotiate. A pause. He said he needed money. He said if I helped him, he'd sign papers, relinquish custody, walk away and not come back. The fluorescent light buzzed in its fixture. Ryder could hear his own breathing. He wanted $10,000, Walter said. I didn't have $10,000 liquid. I told him that. He didn't believe me. He looked at his hands. He said he'd find another way to raise it. He said, I shouldn't be surprised if things got complicated. A pause. And then he walked out, and 3 weeks later he was gone. And now he's back, Ryder said. Now he's back. And he has felled. Walter looked up. I think the original debt is still there. I think felled is how he's going to raise it. And I think Leia... He stopped. Leia is still leverage, Ryder said. With me, Walter said. He knows I'll pay. Eventually. He knows I'll find a way to get $10,000 if the alternative is what it's become. Ryder sat very still for a moment. The whole structure rearranged itself. Not a father returning for genuine connection, not even purely a father asserting legal authority out of spite or control. A transaction. A man who'd turned his own child into a mechanism for raising money from the one person in town who cared enough to pay. Does Leia know? He said. No, Walter said. God, no. Ryder looked at the wall. He felt something move through him that was colder and more focused than anger. Anger was loud and imprecise, and this thing was neither of those. This was the very particular interior state of a man who had decided something that he understood would cost him. If Dale gets Leia, Ryder said, he doesn't actually want her. He wants you to pay to get her back. Yes. Which means keeping her away from him doesn't resolve this. He'll keep coming back, keep escalating, because the money problem doesn't go away. I know. Which means the problem isn't Leia's location, Ryder said. The problem is Dale's debt, and Feld. Walter looked at him with something in his face that was partly relief, the relief of having finally said the thing, and partly fear of what came next. I should have told you from the start, Walter said. Yeah, Ryder said. You should have. He said it without heat. It was just a fact, settling into the record. What are you going to do? Walter said. Ryder stood up from the stool. He picked up his jacket from the counter and put it on and zipped it. First, he said, I'm going to go talk to Leia. She was in the basement room. She was sitting on the cot with the paperback open on her knees, but she wasn't reading. The book was open to the same page it had been on when he'd come down the stairs, which meant she'd been sitting with it as an object rather than a text, holding it the way people held familiar things when they needed something to do with their hands while they waited for the other shoe to drop. She looked up when he came in. She read his face. What happened? She said. He sat down on the wooden chair across from the cot and put his forearms on his knees and looked at her. Your father came to the school this morning, he said. He left when I got there. He didn't take you. I know, she said. I saw you leave the diner. I figured. He's going to try again, Ryder said, but not the way you think. He paused. What I'm going to tell you is hard to hear. I need you to stay with me through all of it before you decide what to do with it. She closed the book and set it on the cot beside her. Her hands went flat on her knees in that particular way. The same gesture as Walter, the same gesture as herself in the booth 2 nights ago. He noticed this without commenting on it. He told her. Not all of it. Not the Feld angle, not the corridor, not the operational implications. But the thing that she deserved to know, the thing that was hers to know regardless of the other considerations, that her father had come to Walter 6 weeks before he disappeared, that he'd asked for money, that her custody, her existence in his life, was denominated in Dale Mercer's economy in a specific dollar figure. He watched her face as he told her. She didn't cry. He hadn't expected her to. She'd moved past the age where tears were the automatic response to bad information, if she'd ever been that age. What happened in her face was something more adult and more devastating than tears. It was the expression of someone having a suspicion confirmed that they'd hoped, at some deep and mostly unconscious level, was wrong. Because there was always that hope. Even in children who'd been failed completely, who had every rational reason to expect nothing, there was the biological, pre-rational, unkillable hope that the person who was supposed to love them did, in some form, even a damaged form, even a monstrous form. She sat with it for a long moment. How much? She said. He told her. She nodded once, slowly, like she was taking inventory. And Walter didn't pay, she said. He didn't have it. He tried to say so and your father didn't believe him. Walter would have paid, she said, if he'd had it. Yeah, Ryder said, he would have. She looked at the floor. She was doing something with her jaw, a small, controlled movement, the working of a muscle that was the only visible evidence of whatever was happening in the interior. "What do you need from me?" she said. He looked at her. 9 years old, both feet on the floor, spine straight, asking what she could contribute. "For the next few days," he said, "I need you to stay in this building, not the school, not outside. Here. Okay? And I need you to trust that we're handling the part of this that you can't." She looked at him. "The dangerous part." "Yes." "Are you going to get hurt?" she said. He held her gaze. "I'm going to try not to." "That's not the same as no." "No," he said. "It isn't." She looked at him for a long moment, with all that comprehensive, undeceivable attention. Then she picked up the paperback and opened it to the page she'd been holding and looked down at it. "Okay," she said. He stood up. He was almost to the stairs when she said, without looking up from the book, "Ryder." He stopped. "He was never going to sign the papers," she said. "Even if Walter paid, you know that." He turned back to look at her. "I know," he said. "So whatever you're going to do," she said, still looking at the page, "just make sure it actually works." He stood in the basement doorway with the bare bulb throwing its hard light across the concrete floor, and he looked at the top of her bent head and felt something move through him that he had no clean name for. Not protectiveness, which was too simple, and not love, which was too fast and too loaded, but something in the territory between them, something that had the weight and permanence of a decision already made that you only recognized after the fact. He went upstairs. Cord was waiting at the back entrance, rain-wet, jaw set, and his face had the look of a man who had just received information that had changed the shape of the problem. "Feld's not at the motel," Cord said. "He checked out this morning." He paused. "Price found his car. It's parked on the service road behind this building. Has been for at least 2 hours." The rain came down steady and cold between them. "He's not waiting for Dale to go through the front," Ryder said. "No," Cord said. "He's already here." And from somewhere on the service road, barely audible under the rain's steady percussion, came the sound of a vehicle's engine idling. The engine idled for exactly 4 seconds. Then it cut. The silence it left was worse. Ryder moved first. He pushed Cord back through the door and pulled it shut and turned the deadbolt with one motion, already moving toward the kitchen, already running the building's geometry in his mind. Back entrance, side window, the basement stairs, the one interior door that locked from both sides. "Price," he said. Cord already had his phone out. "Calling him." "Tell him the side window on the north wall. Tell him now." He went to the kitchen and pulled Walter away from the counter with one hand on his arm. Walter didn't resist. He'd heard enough from the tone alone. "Basement," Ryder said. "Laya, stay with her. Don't open that door for anyone but me or Terry." "How many?" "Go." Walter went. Ryder moved to the front of the diner and killed the neon sign. The dining room dropped into the thin gray light of the overcast afternoon coming through the windows, and he stayed below the window line and moved along the wall to the far end and looked out at an angle at the parking lot. Dale Mercer's truck was parked at the lot's entrance, blocking the exit. Dale was behind the wheel, not moving, just sitting there, engine off, watching the front of the building, not coming in, keeping the front occupied while Feld worked the back. "Cord," his voice was very quiet. "Price is on the north window," Cord said from the kitchen doorway. "Terry's on the service road coming around from the east on foot." "How far out?" 2 minutes. 2 minutes was a long time. He heard the back door before it opened. The specific sound of a lock being worked from outside with something that wasn't a key, the metallic whisper of it, practiced and quick. He was already moving down the hallway toward it when the door swung inward and Marcus Feld came through with the unhurried competence of a man who'd entered buildings he wasn't invited to enough times that the act had lost its adrenaline. Feld was broad, 50 or so, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years in transit and the specific flatness of expression of someone for whom other people had become primarily logistical. He had a man behind him, younger, hooded, hands at his sides. Feld registered Ryder in the hallway and stopped. They looked at each other in the dim corridor light. Kane, Feld said. Not surprised, confirming. You already knew, Ryder said. I figured it out a while ago. Feld tilted his head slightly. Took me a minute because the last thing I expected was for you to be here over a kid. Now you know. Now I know. A pause. Doesn't really change the situation. What is the situation? Ryder said. Specifically. The situation is, I've been running a clean operation through this county for 8 months, and Ironbound showing up made my clients nervous. His voice was conversational, unhurried. Nervous clients make bad decisions. Bad decisions cost me money. So you wanted to know if we were here for you. I wanted to know if I needed to have a conversation. He paused. I'm having it. And Dale? Dale is a side arrangement. He needed resources. I needed a read on your people. It was convenient. He shrugged slightly. He can have his kid. That's not my business. He doesn't want his kid, Ryder said. He wants Walter Boone to pay to get her back. Something shifted in Feld's expression. A small recalculation. That's between them. It's between us now, Ryder said, because you're standing in this building. The younger man behind Feld shifted his weight. Cord had moved up the hallway and was visible now in Feld's peripheral vision, and Feld was doing the same count Ryder was doing. 2 in the hallway, unknown quantities elsewhere, 1 man in a truck in the front lot who thought he was the distraction but had become the exposed position. Here's what I'm offering, Ryder said. You walk out. Your operation on this corridor continues. We were never here about you, and we're still not. Ironbound has no interest in what runs through Harlow County. Feld looked at him for a long moment. And Dale? Dale's going to have a conversation with Walter that ends with him signing papers and leaving. That's the only version of this where he doesn't have the warrant enforced by morning. He's not going to like that. He doesn't have to like it. A pause. The corridor was very quiet. Rain pressed against the back door, still open, letting in cold air that moved through the hallway with a slow, deliberate chill. And if I don't walk out, Feld said. Ryder didn't answer. He didn't need to. Feld looked at Cord. He looked back at Ryder. He was calculating. The real calculation, not the posture of negotiation, but the actual arithmetic of what the next 5 minutes cost versus what walking out of a hallway cost. Men like Feld were not ideological. They were operational. The operation was the thing. He nodded once. He turned and walked back through the door. The younger man followed. The door pulled shut. Ryder stood in the hallway for a moment and listened to the sound of footsteps on wet gravel fading. Then Terry's voice came through Cord's phone. They're moving away, east side, toward the service road, getting in the car. He exhaled once, controlled. Then he went to the front of the building. Dale was still in the truck. Ryder walked out the front door and across the parking lot in the rain and stopped at the driver's side window and knocked on the glass once. Dale looked at him. He looked past him toward the building. He was reading the situation and not liking what he was reading. He lowered the window. Feld's gone, Ryder said. Dale's jaw tightened. You've got one option left, Ryder said. You come inside, you sit down with Walter, and you sign everything the attorney has prepared. He paused. Or I make a call to Clement County and your warrant gets phoned in to the Harlow Sheriff's Office, and you spend tonight in a holding cell and tomorrow in front of a judge who already has a guardianship petition in front of her. You can't. I can, Ryder said. I already have the number pulled up. Dale stared at him. His hands were on the steering wheel, and his knuckles had gone pale with the grip. She's my daughter, he said. His voice had changed. The practiced ease was gone. What was underneath it was something raw and less certain. Not love, not exactly, but the complicated wreckage of a man who understood, at some level, what he'd done with the one thing that had been worth something, and couldn't find the way back from it. I know, Ryder said. And he meant it. Not as absolution, not as comfort, just as acknowledgement of the fact that was true and didn't change anything. Come inside. Dale sat in the truck for a long moment in the rain. His eyes moved to the diner's dark window, looking for something, maybe. Looking for her. He opened the door. Well, They sat in the back booth, Dale across from Walter, Ryder at the end. Cord stood near the front door. The attorney's documents were on the table. Walter had retrieved them from the safe in the office, his hand steady in a way that Ryder knew was costing him. Dale looked at the documents for a long time without touching them. "She doesn't want to see me," Dale said. "No," Walter said. "She doesn't. She's 10 years old. She doesn't know." "She knows," Walter said. "She's known for a long time." The diner was very quiet, rain against the window, the distant sound of a truck on Route 9, the fluorescent light above the counter buzzing with its permanent low frequency, the sound of this place, the sound that had been the background of Leah Mercer's life for years. Dale picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line, and then, from the basement stairs came a sound, the soft, certain fall of a child's footsteps, and the door at the top of the stairs opening, and Leah's voice, clear and flat, and without any of the fear that should have been in it. "I want to say something first." Everyone in the room turned. She stood at the top of the basement stairs in her gray hoodie, her hands at her sides, and she looked at her father across the length of the diner with eyes that held everything she'd ever been, and everything she'd survived, and everything she was still becoming. And Dale Mercer looked back at her, and something in his face broke open in a way that was too late and too little and true, nonetheless. "You don't have to say anything," Walter said quietly. "I know," she said. "I want to." She walked toward the booth, and every person in the room held very still, and the rain came down outside, and the neon sign was dark, and the pen was in her father's hand, and she stopped at the edge of the table and looked at him and said what she'd been carrying for 9 years in 11 words. "I needed you to choose me. You never did. Sign it." The pen touched the paper. Dale Mercer signed his name the way he did most things, quickly, without looking directly at what he was doing, the signature of a man who had learned long ago that hesitation cost more than commitment, and had applied that lesson to every wrong thing in his life. The pen scratched across the signature line, and then he set it down and pushed the documents toward Walter and put both hands flat on the table. Nobody spoke. Leah was still standing at the edge of the booth. She hadn't moved since she'd said the 11 words, and she wasn't moving now, and her face had the particular stillness of someone who had done a hard thing and was waiting for their body to catch up to the fact that it was over. Her hands were at her sides. Her breathing was slow and even in the way of someone controlling it deliberately. Dale looked at her. He looked at her the way a man looked at something he was about to lose access to permanently, cataloging it, because even men who had used everything badly still felt the loss of it. His eyes were dry. He wasn't going to cry. Ryder had seen enough men in enough rooms to know the difference between the ones who cried and the ones who carried it differently. Dale was the second kind, the kind who went quiet and inward, the kind whose damage ran horizontal rather than vertical. "Leah," he said. She looked at him. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Whatever he'd intended to say arranged itself into something smaller, something that fit the room and the occasion better than whatever the original sentence had been. "I know it doesn't mean anything," he said, "but I'm sorry." She held his gaze for a moment. Her expression did not change in the direction of forgiveness, and it did not change in the direction of dismissal. It stayed in a third place, the place that was beyond both of those, the place of a person who had heard the apology and was choosing to neither accept nor reject it, simply to note its existence and continue. "Okay," she said. Dale nodded once. He slid out of the booth and stood and picked up his jacket from the seat and put it on. He looked at Walter for a moment. Walter looked back at him with the expression of a man who had known him for a very long time and was choosing, at this specific moment, to keep everything he knew behind his eyes rather than say it. "Take care of her," Dale said. "I've been taking care of her," Walter said quietly. "For 4 years." Dale absorbed this. Then he walked to the front door and pushed through it into the rain and the parking lot in the dark, and the bell above the door jingled once and was still, and the sound of his truck starting was muffled by the weather, and then diminished and then gone. The diner was very quiet. Cord at the front door watched the truck's taillights until they disappeared onto Route 9. Then he turned back to the room and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. Walter picked up the signed documents and held them for a moment with both hands before setting them carefully back on the table. He looked at Leia. She was still standing at the booth's edge, the gray hoodie a little too big for her, the repaired sneaker on her left foot, the paperback's dog-eared page somewhere in the back of her mind. He said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said. "Are you okay?" She thought about this with the same seriousness she brought to everything. "I will be," she said. "Not right now, but I will be." Walter nodded. He'd been a man for long enough to know the difference between someone who said, "I will be," because they were performing resilience, and someone who said it because it was accurate. This was the second kind. He stood up and went to the kitchen. He came back with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, warm from the flat top, and set it on the counter at her regular stool. He set a glass of orange juice beside it. He didn't say anything. He went back to the kitchen. Leia looked at the plate for a moment. Then she walked to the counter and sat down and ate. Ryder was outside. He stood in the parking lot with the rain coming down. Not heavy anymore, but persistent. The thin, steady kind that didn't announce itself but accumulated. He'd been standing there since Dale's truck disappeared. His jacket was wet across the shoulders. He wasn't thinking in words. He was doing the thing he did after situations resolved, allowing the operational state to drain out slowly, the hyper-attentive readiness that had been running for days now moving toward something quieter. Cord came out and stood beside him. They looked at Route 9 together. "Feld's gone," Cord said. "Terry tracked them to the county line. They kept going." "He'll reroute," Ryder said. "Yeah. Our problem?" "Not unless he makes it one." Ryder looked at the wet asphalt. "Which he won't. He's operational. We gave him the clean exit he needed." Cord was quiet for a moment. Then, "You staying?" It was the question he'd been not asking himself for weeks, and hearing it said aloud gave it a shape and weight it hadn't had as an interior thing. The motel room, the storage unit with the bike, the truck that had started feeling more like a permanent vehicle than a temporary one, the corner booth. "For a while," Ryder said. Cord nodded. No commentary, no analysis. He understood, the way people who'd ridden enough miles together understood things. That for a while was a complete answer, that it didn't require qualification, that the shape of a man's life sometimes made a turn that wasn't announced and didn't need to be. "Price is leaving tomorrow," Cord said. "Terry's got another week. Tell them—" He stopped. "Tell them what, exactly? Thank you was insufficient, and they all knew it." "Tell them I know," he said. Cord almost smiled. It was a small movement, barely there. "They know you know." He went back inside. Ryder stayed in the rain. The diner reopened at 6 the following morning. Darlene arrived at 5:30, as always, switched on the lights and the coffee machine and turned the sign in the window from closed to open, the O flickering twice before holding. And by 6, the first truck was in the lot, and by 6:15 the counter had its 3 regular stools occupied by the men who always occupied them at this hour. Their order always the same. Their conversation moving through the weather and the road conditions and the price of diesel with the unhurried rhythm of people who came here because this place was a constant in a world of variables. Leia was on the stool at the end of the counter with her homework spread out, the math she hated to her left and the short story collection to her right. And she was eating toast and working through a problem with the quiet, focused patience of someone who had decided that disliking something was not a sufficient reason to avoid it. She'd been downstairs when Ryder arrived. She'd come up on her own, without being called, which was new. He ordered coffee and the usual and sat in his booth and watched the morning assemble itself. At 7:15, Walter came out of the kitchen. He never came out during breakfast service. The flat top needed constant attention, and Darlene handled the front and the system worked. But he came out this morning and walked to the end of the counter where Leia was, and stood beside her stool and said something too quiet for the room to hear, and she looked up from her homework and said something back, and he put one large hand briefly on the top of her head. The paternal gesture of a man who'd been holding back from it for weeks, careful not to presume, careful not to push, and she didn't pull away. She went back to her homework. Walter went back to the kitchen. Ryder looked at his coffee. He stayed until close that night. It was a Tuesday, slow, the last customer out by 9:30, and Darlene took her coat and her keys and said goodnight and the diner settled into its after-hours quiet. The fluorescence and the hum and the smell of the day's cooking still in the air and the rain finally stopped, leaving the parking lot wet and reflective under the lot's single working light. Leia was doing her last round of tables. She moved through the room the same way she always had, methodical, quiet, efficient, and yet not the same, because something in the quality of the efficiency had shifted. It was no longer the efficiency of someone surviving. It was beginning to be the efficiency of someone who had decided, incrementally and without ceremony, that this place was worth maintaining. She stopped beside his booth on the last pass. "The hearing's in 3 weeks," she said. "Yeah." "Walter says it's basically decided, based on what the attorney filed." "That's my understanding, too." She looked at the table, then at him. "Are you going to be here?" "For it." He looked at her. The question was simple and direct in the way all her questions were, and it was asking something that was also simple, and also underneath that simple thing was something with weight and history. A child who had been told things by adults that turned out not to be true, asking one more time, one more adult, whether this one was going to hold. "Yeah," he said, "I'll be there." She held his gaze for a moment with that flat, comprehensive attention, reading him, finding what she was looking for, or not finding it, and then nodded once in the way that was her version of acceptance. Not demonstration, not performance, just the internal filing of a thing that had been tested and provisionally cleared. She picked up her bus tub and went to the kitchen. He sat in the booth for a long time after that, long enough for the coffee to go cold, which he didn't mind, long enough for Walter to finish closing the kitchen and come out and pour himself a cup and stand at the counter and look at the room with the expression of a man who had been in it for a long time and was not done being in it. Long enough for the neon sign's O to go through its cycle twice, flickering, holding, flickering again. Its malfunction so familiar by now that it had become a kind of rhythm, the diner's own particular heartbeat. From somewhere on Route 9, at the edge of hearing, a pair of Harleys moved through the night. Not stopping, just passing. The sound of them building from nothing and swelling briefly and then diminishing east, 2 riders going somewhere in the dark, and the sound of them hanging in the air for a moment after they were gone, the way certain sounds did, the way the important ones always did. Ryder listened until it was completely gone. Then he picked up his cold coffee and drank the last of it and looked at the window, at the wet parking lot and the working light and the darkness of the county road beyond it, and felt the particular quiet quality of a thing that had arrived at its right shape, not perfect, not without cost, not without the marks of everything it had taken to get here, but right in the way that mattered. The diner light hummed. The sign flickered. Somewhere in the building, a child was doing homework she hated and eating toast she'd learned to ask for, in a room with a man who would not leave, under a roof that had been fixed and would be fixed again whenever the weather required it, in a town that had failed her. And then, slowly, corner booth by corner booth, hadn't. The O steadied and held. For tonight, it held.